Over 400 quilts from all over the world, each one a masterpiece. You don't know where to look first. It's a wonderful dilemma to be in. Join us at the World Quilt and Textile event in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's next on Lap Quilting.
Could you imagine a more clever object? Warms the body, ignites the mind. A child sleeps under mother's creation, together forever. The art of the heart and design of the mind puts you to bed one day at a time. The art of the heart and design of the mind.
Seldom do we visit a convention for the second time, but when it's in our home state and really big, how can we resist? The World Quilt and Textile show here in Greensboro, North Carolina has once again brought out the most glorious quilts from around the world. David and Peter Mancuso, with the support of Bernina of America and Springs Industry, have put on this event. It took all day of intense judging, 252 quilts, to arrive at these ribbons. So many stitches, so many unique designs. Why, we ran out of adjectives just praising the quilt makers. Behind the scenes at the World Quilt and Textile event, it took fast motion to hang over 300 quilts. This event has become an annual affair, allowing us to view quilt artists from all over the world. Check the website to know future dates and locations. A collection from South Africa brought to the States by Odette Tolksdorf was just fascinating. Odette, welcome to the States.
Thanks, Georgia.
You have brought an exciting collection with you. Tell us about it today.
What I've done, I've chosen 3 embroidery groups from different parts of South Africa. We've got the Shivarika group. Shivarika means toil for your survival. And they're all self-help groups. This group behind me is called Mapula, which is Mother of Rain in the local language. And this is the Karos workers. And they are all in the northern parts of South Africa, these embroidery groups. If we look at these Mapula, you can see they're almost like story quilts. And they represent different aspects of their life.
A lot of exuberance with color. They're not afraid of red and yellow and all
Definitely,
colors.
yes. And it particularly shows up well on the black background. Then we have the Karos workers. Now these are all wives of laborers on a farm, also in the northern province of South Africa, because all this was started by the wife of a farmer. And her name is Irma van Rooyen. And she started about 1990 with 15 women doing embroideries. And she now has 400 women doing embroideries.
And they use embroidery thread throughout. There's very little of the background showing.
Yes, so the whole background is covered with embroidery thread. And the other interesting design aspect of these embroideries is the use of the white spots and the use of white with color.
Very well balanced, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, yes.
That's right.
Well, we want to end with this particular artist group. Tell us about this.
Okay, this is the Shivarika group, and you can see their style is slightly different. They tend to do outlines and leave quite a lot of black in the background, but they also pick up on the animals which are around them.
What about your work? You're here as a teacher. Tell us a little bit about your endeavors in quilt making.
Well, I've been quilting for about 15 years. I was trained as a graphic designer, and I wasn't working, and I got a new sewing machine about 15 years ago, and I went to classes, and just during those classes I saw that this was something that I loved, that I could combine my love of sewing and design and color and fabrics. So I got into it quite slowly at first, but I would say in the last 10 years, I've been very active in the quilting field. I'll tell you about this one first. This was made in 1993, and I have gone through quite a few different styles in my work since I started. This was made particularly for a class which I started teaching in 1993, and I'm doing at World Quilt and Textile. It's called Thatched Dwellings in Africa. And the inspiration came from the thatched dwellings that I see. If I drive to the game parks in South Africa, you see a lot of these thatched dwellings along the roadside. And I've always loved the shapes of them and the different, the way that they're built and painted different colors and textures.
And then you've gone to something quite dramatic, I would say, and tell us about the book, and here this quilt is on the cover.
Okay, this was made last year, and it was I think the second in the series that I've now done, and this is called The Backbone is Connected. And it was used on the cover of this book. This book is written by Norma Slavitt, and it's a book on some South African quilt makers, about 20 South African quilt makers.
Thank you for spending time with us today, Odette.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Georgia.
Now country hop as we get to know other quilters. Here at the World Quilt Expo in Greensboro, we have a chance to meet Anne Fahy from Ireland. Whereabouts in Ireland, Anne?
I'm from Galway. That's kind of halfway down on the left.
Anne, how did you get started in doing this texture work?
I was at a quilt show in Washington State in about 1989, 90, I think. And I met Lois Erickson there, and she was teaching textured work, but for using clothing. So her students were having so much fun, and because I like the feel of fabric, I like working with fabric, I thought I'd try it.
A visit to Anne's class defines what she means by texture. Just gaze at the many ideas, from ruffles on the bias with organdy to twin needlework,
To show that you can use it in a regular patchwork. It just,
elastic in the bobbin,
Has a lot of give to it.
pleater tucks that result in honeycomb smocking on the reverse side, and even two-color quilts.
the stripy fabric really big.
Now, in Ireland, is quilting popular? I mean, I see you have brought a collection of quilts with you. What sort of interest is going on in Ireland presently?
There's an Irish Patchwork Society which has about 500 members out of a population of 3.5 million, so it's quite a few really. There is no tradition of quilting in Ireland, but a lot of people have been doing it more recently as leisure sort of exercise.
Well, the collection that you've brought is certainly very art-worthy as we look around in these installation. Can you describe some of the quilts that you've brought here?
Jane Lloyd is a very well-known quilter in Ireland, and she's exhibited a lot in the US as well as, and this is a sort of experimental pieces for her with sort of reverse applique to try and get a proper full spiral that she's been doing.
Tell me about the Robert Browning quilt.
This is the work of Anne Fleeton, and she, in this particular series of quilts that she's been trying to experiment with the actual makeup of the quilt. So this quilt can be two-sided, and instead of having some batting in the middle in a traditional way, she has the organza in the middle, and she's cut out the sort of squares so that can be seen, and then put the writing on them.
And then we have some bright quilts over here.
Debbie Bailey's quilt, the one over there, she painted all of the circles, and then she's got a few sort of inlaid pieces. She has been painting on fabric for the last while and finds that much more satisfying than piecing it together.
She's making her own fabric, so
That's
to
right,
speak.
yes.
All
And
right.
so is Ema. This is all dye painted that she did. And the piece here then, the long piece, is by Ali Kay, and this is again, she has dyed all of these pieces, and these are mostly linens and with a few silks, and it's called Leaves from an Irish Seashore. So it's the
And we really see some new concepts here. I think we can look forward to more from the Irish contingent. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today.
Thank you very much, Georgia. It's been a pleasure.
We interrupt this quilt show for special coverage of the Quilter's Alphabet. We're back here in the Quilt Built studio, and today's letters are I and J. But first, let's do that feature block of the show. This time, for our North Carolina show, I've designed a North Carolina star. If you study it, you can see it's a basic 4-patch. But this time, it's diagonally a 4 patch, so we end up with 4 triangles. If you're a very observant quilter, I bet you can see the difference in this block and this one that I'm getting ready to piece. That's right, it's a reverse image. And it's because I used freezer paper to cut it out. And quite often, the image gets reversed when that happens. It's no big deal. I think the star can go either way. And so what happens here is I have an opportunity to do that chain piecing idea. And I would go ahead, in this case, and put the 2 right angles together. And once I have that underneath my presser foot, and I've got my quilter's foot on, and then I would just go all the way around and picking these up. And I keep them in order, and that certainly helps me. And I would pull that freezer paper off. I used it to cut it out, but and to add that 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I don't need it anymore. And I'll just keep coming, turn this back, and as long as I keep them in order, I shouldn't have any problem. Okay, the secret is lining up those raw edges. Doesn't hurt to sew on air for a couple of stitches. One more I've got to do right here. Once again, I'm going to pull that freezer paper off. Now, I remember where I've picked up the last one. That does kind of help when you're chain piecing, because then it's a matter of coming and putting this back and this back. Whoops, keep turning it around until you're happy. And a little bit of thumb creasing helps too. Come back over here, thumb crease. Come back over here, up, keep turning it around until you're happy, thumb crease. Now, more chain stitching. Now I can come like this, and this time I've got another right angle to align to. Do you see that? Okay, and another thing's got to happen here when I stitch here, and I'm going to show you this in just a few minutes. It's very important. Come here, all right, and what am I doing here? Flipping this over, finding that right angle again, coming here. Oh, I just keep going. One more, come this way, find that right angle, and this time I'm stitching right into where it might go back. So I think it really helps to have either a seam ripper or a little stiletto there to come all the way down. Okay, and one more. Let's get this turned and come like this. I'm going to pin this, and then I'm going to show you exactly what would happen here. Once that has been done, let's pretend that's been stitched. And when you take these apart, I'll show you the key. The key here is that when you stitch that from this raw edge to that right angle, you have that 1/4 inch. So then you can go ahead and place these, once you've clip these apart, place these in your positioning like this, and of course you know you've got your opposite color over here, and let's pretend we've sewn this one, okay? And now one more set of chain stitching to here, to here, and to here, and here, and you're ready to put your 4 patch together. So try your North Carolina star. I is for in the ditch. A line of quilting done in the depression created by a seam line on the side of the seam that is free from the seam allowance. Now in the quilt world, we use it a lot because it's a way to anchor the 3 layers. It gives you an opportunity to almost pre-baste, and then you can come back in and do your own hand quilting. In the art world of quilting, it quite often is done because it does not take away from any of the design. So, in this case, I'm going to give you a little sample, and what I would do would be to take off my regular patchwork foot, and I turn to a foot that I really do like. It's called the edge stitch foot. What I like about it is that it has an all-purpose opening, but then there is this bar that drops down. And so when I have that installed, it allows me to keep my needle centered, and then, for instance, if I were going to just on this little piece right here, simply want to stitch in the ditch, I can have that bar, and quite often when I'm machine quilting, I will lengthen my stitch a little bit also. But I can stitch right in the ditch. It's anchoring the 3 layers, and you cannot even see where that's stitching because the bar is riding so close to that fold. Now the seam allowance is on this side, so that is why I'm stitching on this pink side. And so I use that a lot. It does rely on keeping your hands very stable on the quilting because you don't want anything shifting. You're doing this without a walking foot. But let me come down here and show you. Now I dare you to find where I've machine quilted. Doesn't that work nice? Now let me show you some examples of where I've used that before. In the tangram vest, you can see that I simply went in between the patchwork. On the back side, you can see those straight lines. Then that allowed me to come back and do a little circular motif in between. So it does anchor your patchwork. In something like this, just strip wool, where there is a lot of texture, and you've got velvet and wool, just by stitching in the ditch here will raise the strips, but not take away from the other design. Another place that I used it is on this little triangular vest. And you can see right here where I wanted the triangles to really stand out. I didn't want to stitch in the area itself, so I stitched in the ditch. Now, when it comes to my big quilts, that's kind of another thing. And I know that I have quite an expanse that's going to go on my table. So I learned a little tip out in New Mexico, and that's to take this inset, put it right in here in my drawer. I also have the wonderful extension of my table, and I'll do one other thing. I'll come and take off the edge foot stitch, and this time I'm going to put in my walking foot because I'm going to be quilting a large layered pineapple quilt. So once I have that in, then I've got, of course, my big quilt to go in, and I let part of it hang off the table. Part of it will just fall right on that drawer, and I develop a pattern where I'm going to go, knowing exactly that I'll stitch here, come here, here, and here, and here, and then I'm ready to simply start with my walking foot, but stitching in that ditch again. Well, this would take me about 2 more weeks, but I promise to finish it. What about J for juxtaposition, to place next to each other? Well, I just like to say that word. A lot of our blocks are juxtaposition next to each other, but I feel so grown up when I say that word. And now a trip to the British Isles, back at the Quilt Show. A big welcome to Annette Claxton, who is here as a teacher at the World Quilt Expo. Welcome, Annette. Thank you for sharing time with us. You have brought some quilts from Britain.
Yes, I have. A mixture of hand-dyed and purchased fabric, and she's machine quilted around both the images and the outside of the quilt.
And I like the stylized work on top of a very traditional quilting, so it has a whole new concept.
Yes, it really is stunning,
Yes.
isn't it?
Look at this machine quilting. Oh my. Tell me about this one.
This is a piece from Scotland, and it's by Sheena Norquay. She specialises in machine quilting, and in this piece she's used Baroque carvings from France and from Germany, and you can see these absolutely delightful little faces. It's been machine quilted in metallics, which is not an easy thing to do, and I think you'll agree she's done it most beautifully.
And separated her panels with some satin stitching,
Yes,
which is very effective.
Yes, it's immaculately done, isn't it?
And look at this pink number.
And now in this way we go to another part of the country. This is Wales, and this is using traditional Welsh design, so it's a medallion, and then most beautifully hand quilted. It's a cot quilt, and this is by Fahy Rhys-Griffiths. You can see that her stitching is absolutely exquisite, and I always say that her quilting stitches are like angels' kisses.
Oh.
They are absolutely beautiful.
I want to see more from Britain.
Good, yes, come.
Annette, tell us the location of this quilt. Where was it made?
This one is by Jennifer Hollingdale, who lives in London, and she made the quilt after a trip to Greece. So it's the floats bobbing in the blue sea, and she's used a combination of transparent fabrics, and she's also used colour overlaps.
And then what a colorful quilt here with somewhat of an Amish influence, I'd
It's
say.
beautiful, isn't it? This is by Liz Hayward, who lives in She's used a grid that is changing colour from bottom through to top, going from dark to light. And in the background, she's also changing the colours from light through to dark. She's a very talented quilter.
It's a handsome quilt.
Yes, it's lovely, isn't it?
Annette, come over and let's talk a little bit about yourself. Now, you're here as a teacher, and
Yes.
what is your history in quilting? When did you start?
Oh, I started around about 1983, and I have to say that I was about 3 weeks ahead of the students.
Oh.
Because the students asked me if I would teach them patchwork, so I didn't tell them that.
We learn so much from our students,
Yes,
don't we?
indeed, yes.
Well, what has been your focus over the years? I think just by gazing at your quilts, I'd say they're more modern.
Yes, they are. I always make contemporary quilts to my own designs.
Annette, then for some more color. How fantastic. Tell us about this one.
Well, I have to tell you that this is the colour of our bedroom walls, so I really do like bright colours a lot. But it's a repeating block, and you can see that moving from your right hand, as we come across, we lose more of the block on one side and gain more on the other. So gradually they shift across. And the same thing happens from top to bottom. You lose a little bit off the top, and then you see more of the bottom down to the next row.
So are curves one of your specialty too? Or?
Yes, they are. Yes, I like to work in curves, and I actually find them easier than straight lines.
Well, is this the sort of thing that your students will progress to and do something on this order?
I hope so. I hope that they'll be working on repeating blocks that will be interesting and perhaps have an interesting grid.
Perhaps we need to check this out, and we'll see more of you in class tomorrow.
That would be lovely. I shall look forward to it.
In the classroom, Annette introduced the curve pattern concept.
Now this morning, as you see, you all made up the same repeated block, and you can see from what has gone up on the wall how, although you've all made it from very different colours and tonal contrasts, you can see that when you put those blocks together, you begin to get an overall pattern, wonderful movement, very lively look. And I hope that's helped you to understand how the repeating block will work.
She even put her husband to work in the class.
Oh, Robert is a graphic designer, and so we're very well matched here.
How perfect. Do you have him sewing yet, or he doesn't sew?
No, he doesn't sew. I did suggest one day he said to me, "I've designed a quilt for you," and I said, "That's good. I'll just teach you how to sew." So after that, he didn't design for me anymore.
It was great to meet Annette and see their work. Maybe next time I'll meet her at an event in England. I hope you enjoyed a taste of the World Quilt and Textile event on today's show. The TV camera cannot
Martingale and Company, home of That Patchwork Place, publisher of America's best-loved craft and hobby books. By Hobbs Bonded Fibers, maker of heirloom premium cotton and wool batting, with a package labeling system to help quilters select the correct batting for specific projects. And by Horn of America, cabinets of the future today.